Hi, and welcome to From Many People's Strength, the podcast that covers Saskatchewan politics and current events. My name is Corey Johnson, and my pronouns are he and him.
And my name is David Richards. My pronouns are they and them or he and him.
Federated Co-op energy sales dropped $1.3 billion in 2020, annual report says.
Yeah,
so I guess the entire energy sector, like the oil industry itself, did suffer quite large losses early in 2020.
Yeah.
I think that probably makes a big difference on this.
Yeah. Well, and Federated Co-op deals largely with gasoline.
Yeah.
Right. This isn't like, at first I was thinking about like, well, people still need to heat their homes, if anything, like even more so. And, home heating costs are, but again, they don't sell natural gas. Isn't their big thing. They basically, it's gasoline is their bread and butter. And
so
we're all driving less places.
Yeah, that's right.
So.
Yeah. It makes a big difference. Like, and I mean, what was it? March through April, the price of gas was at like the lowest it's been in a decade and a half or something. Yeah. Like it was like 68 cents a liter or something.
Yeah. Well, and cars are getting more efficient too, right? So you need less gas to drive the same amount.
Yeah.
And that's not like that trend is not going to stop. Cars are not going to stop getting more and more efficient. Like I'm a huge proponent of electric vehicles, but even sticking to purely gas powered cars, you have now there are gasoline powered cars that are almost as fuel efficient as hybrids. If you look at the fuel efficiency numbers, you're probably the biggest difference between the fuel economy on a hybrid versus some of these really efficient pure gas powered cars is the flipping from city and highway travel. Because a gas powered car is still going to be way more efficient. A pure gas powered car is still going to be way more efficient on a highway than in the city, whereas the hybrid is going to flip that in a lot of cases. Right. But when you start looking at highway travel, which a lot of our fuel consumption comes from those longer distance things, even gas powered cars are getting better. Same is true for trucks, both personal as well as semis and transportation trucks, right? They're getting more efficient all the time. Because it's not even environmentalism. That's just freaking dollars and cents.
Right? Oh, yeah, that's right.
A shipping company who can cut their fuel budget by, I was going to say 10%, but if they can cut their fuel budget by 1 or 2%, that's huge.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And that's going to negatively impact the oil and gas industry. And that's not, that's not bleeding heart environmentalists causing that.
I remember even back like years and years ago, we were talking about how, when the hybrids were still new, I was under the impression that the technology existed to have more efficient gasoline motors, but for some reason they weren't being used in as many vehicles as they potentially could have been. And the technology has only gotten better since then. So
yeah, and I think it will continue. Like this idea of 100% electric by 2030 or 2050 or whatever benchmark you pick. Like ultimately, I think that's going to become inevitable.
Right.
Or you're going to have gas powered vehicles that are so efficient they use the same amount of gasoline as like an electric car, essentially in the long term, right? Because I'm not naive enough to not realize that when I drove an electric car, it was still getting the electricity was still being generated by fossil fuels, just significantly less, right? Like it's 1/10 even if you burn 100% coal for every kilowatt that is used to power an electric car, the carbon footprint is still 1/10 of
Right.
the amount of gasoline it takes to drive the same distance. So yes, it still has a carbon footprint because the electricity gets generated as well. But electricity is just more efficient for powering a car because motors, by their definition, are electric. Motors are electric in nature. Electric. Like the science of motors is you have electricity being generated. It's why your battery gets charged by you driving. We convert little miniature gasoline explosions into electricity that then, again, it's more than that. And I don't want the comment, he doesn't understand cars. Yeah, you're right. I don't understand cars.
The internal combustion engine, it essentially does take gasoline and explodes it so that we can create motion and electricity.
It's not efficient, is what I'm saying.
No, exactly.
But we're getting more and more efficient. And you know what? If gasoline power cars eventually get to a point where they consume 1/10 the gasoline that they do today to travel the same distance, if we're at that stage, I don't even think most environmentalists who are focusing on outcomes rather than ideology are going to be all that bothered by gas-powered cars at that point.
That's right.
But again, that for things like refineries, that still hits them in their pocketbook. So
right.
FCL is talking about, we need to figure out ways of diversifying our product because that, like, industries go in cycles.
If only there were people saying this for the last however many years.
Shocking, right?
If only there was somebody who had mentioned that.
Yeah. Horse and buggy industry feels need to diversify in 1947. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. You might be late, but
better late than never. Can you save the company? And again, we're going to be using oil for a while still. We're not, like, oil isn't going away in, I was gonna say my lifetime, maybe in my lifetime.
It's hard to say, but oil's going to be around for a long time. Anyway.
Yeah, oil's going to be around for at least the next couple decades to some degree or another. It's in a diminishing role over time because the ways in which we use oil currently are not the most efficient ways of using oil. Yeah, it just is. It's just we don't have ways of being as efficient with oil as we can be with other sources of energy. And again, this is how capitalism is supposed to work. Capitalism is supposed to push us towards better technologies, innovation, and ways of, making the world better because that's where people want to spend their money. So this is the test. Capitalists, get on this. This is your test. Prove that capitalism isn't an inherently flawed and broken philosophy. This is your chance.
We're doomed, man. We're doomed. Who would have thought?
Would have thought. Yeah. We've now discovered AstroTurf lobbying groups pretending to be grassroots, but funded by the oil industry, were part of the outrage.
Yep.
Shocking. Shocking, I tell you.
I
don't know. I just assumed this was happening when it was happening. I don't know. I guess I don't know if I have that much more to say on this because of course they were.
It was so obvious that this was what was happening. Yes. Oil industry executives went to Scott Moe and said, hey, look at what's happening in Regina. We need to change that. And Scott Moe stuck his nose in. And
I guess what is interesting about this story, and this was maybe known information when we were talking about it last month, and I just wasn't digging deeply enough. Everything I heard a month ago, or when this hit the news the first time around, talked about how the city had put forward a motion to not allow oil to advertise. But now
that's not what it was.
That's not what it was. They were still allowed to advertise. It was they weren't allowed to buy naming rights. So they weren't allowed to give the city a bunch of money and have the Sandra Schmerler Leisure Center renamed as
Yeah.
Oilopolis Leisure Center.
The Crescent Point.
Exxon Mobil.
Enterplus or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess the Sander Schmirler would have been fine either way, because once something is already, they weren't going to unname things. But I guess the Northwest Leisure Center or the Southeast Leisure Center, or I guess this was the Southeast, the South Leisure Center or the Northwest, any of the ones that didn't have sort of specific names like the Sander Schmirler or the Lawson, could be renamed as, you know, what have you, the Petro-Canada Dome.
This is a story because our whole province listens to John fucking Gormley.
Tell me how you really feel.
Everybody, like from the southeast corner of the smallest town in Saskatchewan to up north in PA, everybody in the province knew that Regina was banning advertisements from oil companies.
Yeah.
That was the story. And it was not true, for starters. Yeah. That's not what was happening. And also, so now you've got people in these tiny little towns talking about how bad the Regina City Council is.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they're perfect, because I've watched in on a couple of city council meetings, and I'm not a big fan of everything they do.
Yeah.
But when people who have no relation to the city are talking about the city council being so bad, specifically because of this issue, that seems like a problem. Like, we have a right-wing problem in our province.
Yeah. Well, again, we talked about this in the other story as well. Like, if you have to lie about your position, how strong can your position really be? If you can't even tell people what your position actually is.
Yeah.
And people make mistakes. Don't get me wrong.
Of
like,
course,
you know, you and I, I'm sure, and we've owned up to some of them as they've happened, as we've been called out on stuff. Even on this topic, the first time around, I had thought it passed city council when it had only passed a committee. In the very next podcast where we talked about this, I said, oops, like mea culpa. Mea culpa, sorry, not my culpa. Mea culpa.
Is she an actress from somewhere?
Pay for your porn, everyone. Anyway, however, but yeah, I made a mistake. I said, you know, this has passed city council. No, it had passed committee. The next episode, next podcast, come out and say, hey, I screwed up. I misspoke. It's only through committee. It's not actually through city council.
Yeah.
And we moved on. But this doesn't feel like that, where you're, and I'm sure people listening to us are going to say, oh, you're nitpicking, you know, advertising versus naming rights. That's just splitting hairs.
Well, no, it's a major difference. I feel like it's a major difference. Like, they could buy billboards and post up their, you know, pro-oil propaganda all over the city if they want. It's just they couldn't name buildings.
No. Buildings owned by the city. They can still name their own building.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I think it's a major difference. And
Okay. Sure.
I think that anybody who says we're nitpicking is doing it, like, is arguing in bad faith.
Yeah, it's okay. But again, it's a flat out lie at that point. And I think I am bothered by falling for it. I guess it's like it's not like this was reported wrong some places and we just like, no, I don't know if there was any reporting of this that didn't talk about it as advertising, that brought up the fact that it was purely about naming rights.
Yeah.
So that's,
well, because it was even brought up in the same context as porn and like, what was that? Alcohol,
tobacco, and cannabis and porn.
Yeah.
And like,
I mean, obviously were
we at risk from having the OnlyFans leisure center up in the north? Like,
that would be hilarious.
Like, did we need a law for that?
Brazzers Southeast Center.
And like, okay, maybe I don't know. The Kraken swimming pool would be awesome.
Yes, that would be cool.
The Kraken Rum Center.
Yeah,
I don't know. I might go
or
swimming.
even Captain Morgan's Swimming Center. I'd be okay with that.
Were these things? Were we worried about our libraries being named after cigarette companies, like the Virginia Slims Library? Was this a big risk?
This I don't think that there's that many things that are happening like that.
No, but again, so the fact that that's what we're talking about, though, is it so now we can have children's libraries named after gas companies. Like that seems like that does seem a little weird to me. Like the Enron Library.
It seems as weird as the Virginia Slims Library or the Brazzers Library, right? I can see why the oil companies, were put into this group in this sense, because it seems accurate. But
the whole naming rights thing has gotten a little out of hand when we're worried about city facilities selling naming rights, I guess.
Yeah.
That just seems weird in general. Like that, I'm not anti-capitalist in a lot of cases, but that still seems a little odd to me. This isn't where a major NFL team plays. I guess if it's not owned by the city, like Mosaic Stadium isn't owned. I guess owned by the community. It's all complicated and stuff. But
I'm not sure the details exactly of who owns and who gets to decide those things for that. But I don't know. So, but again, this part where the big reveal that yes, it was oil companies, pressuring. We had that propaganda campaign that we talked about at the time with the ads on Facebook and with the Facebook page with 3 likes. Okay. We knew who this was.
Grateful they're not more competent. I don't know. But I guess that part's not surprising. The bait and switch from, naming rights versus advertising is a little disconcerting that pretty much the entirety of the media, including some fairly left-wing media, sort of bought the line. A reporter who has however many stories they need to cover and has so much time to do it in, obviously you and I aren't paid to do this, but even people who are they going to spend the entire time, are they going to invest the entire time reading a whole bill cover to cover, or are they taking someone's word for it at some point?
This is from the Estevan Mercury. We often don't talk about some of our smaller cities. We talk about Saskatoon and Regina a lot. But the city of Estevan invited Elon Musk to view their carbon capture technology.
Yep.
He tweeted looking for something to invest in. I think it was.
It's the newest X Prize, basically.
Yeah.
Right, because the original X Prize was all about essentially what led to SpaceX being formed. Is my understanding of the history of that. And this is like a new X Prize.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, I guess the city of Estevan, they're proud of their carbon capture technology, and
and this may be where my ignorance comes in. Carbon capture technology seems like one of those technologies that got made political when it probably didn't need to be. And this is where I am going to be a little bit more critical of the left. Carbon capture and storage is a good thing.
Yeah, well, that's right.
And again, the Sask Party and the Conservative parties have used this as a justification for not cutting carbon emissions in other places, and I that's not good. Right. But taken on its own merit, this strikes me as a good thing.
Yeah, I can't. The reason that. Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit of a Corey's history.
Fire away.
In what year was it? 2000 and let's say 9. I was a conservative who was a climate change denier and a rampant anti-communist. Like, I went to Cuba and I was worried about because my wife at the time, we went to Cuba on vacation, and I was worried about getting arrested because I had posted so much anti-communist stuff on my social media. Clearly, I was not in touch with what was going on. And the reason that I started to change my views on the existence and reality of climate change was because a friend of mine spoke so adamantly, like he knew so much about the carbon capture technology and the studies around it that were coming out at the time. And he would not let go of the fact that climate change was real. Right. And he used this as some of his basis for his knowledge. And so that carbon capture technology is part of the reason that I believe in climate change now.
Good. All right. Yeah. And yeah, the idea that carbon capture then justifies continued coal use.
Not so much. Yeah, there has been since that time, like that, it was at the time viewed by many as like the beacon on the hill, right? It was the thing that would save humanity from climate change.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's lots of evidence now to show that if we don't do other things, then that's not going to, it's right. Not solving problem.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't think, again, it's almost like the reverse, like the political reverse of the whole mask thing. Like, masks aren't going to save us from COVID.
Right.
Like, we still need vaccines. We still need social distancing. We still need all of these other things. Masks in and of themselves won't save us.
Yeah.
But they're not a bad thing, and they can help slow down many of the negative consequences. I think carbon capture, if viewed in the same way, right? Like it is a harm reduction strategy. As long as you don't put the bike helmet on and now start doing stupid things on your bike, right? Like that's where, again, I do see some of the argument of, okay, if we make too big a deal of this, it can lead to bad behavior. But like,
yeah, I have heard many, well, not many, but I have heard the anti-bike helmet arguments.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, it's just not convincing.
No. And like, I get the science behind it.
Yeah.
But again, there's sample space issues and there's some other issues around that idea. Yes. And again, like, then you just need to be like, awareness of that plays a role, and awareness that carbon capture isn't going to save us from the climate crisis. But can be something to smooth the transition, I think is not a bad thing at all. And I think the left needs to be a little wary about vilifying a beneficial technology because simply because of sort of who has been the proponents of it in the past.
Yeah. It's a slightly different problem, but I find myself at odds with many on the left in the same way, again, about like nuclear power.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to say it's the solve all the problems thing, and it has its own issues, but in our current crisis, we need to do something, and this would provide us with some power that would be without the same carbon footprint.
Yeah, and a full transition to solar or wind, without causing some of the issues that are caused by rare earth metal mining, would be great. But like, that's true with so many things, right? Like and again, just because everything has a downside doesn't mean all downsides are equal.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying the fact that solar energy requires some pretty significant rare earth metal mining that has a not small environmental footprint as well and causes some pretty significant human suffering in the manner in which it's currently occurring.
Yeah.
And like nuclear obviously has issues around nuclear waste. Hydroelectric has major issues around the footprint of dammed waters. Like there's environmental impacts from that. So a lot of our non-fossil fuel based resources, our renewable energy sources, still have environmental impacts as well. We just need to start looking at how do we manage those and where are our trade-offs. And
yeah, that's right. Like there are potentially ways to get solar power from a less harmful way. You know,
absolutely.
So it's worth looking into.
It is. Absolutely. Storage becomes an issue. Storage is the biggest one, right? Like once humans turn the corner on storage of solar energy, again, or I don't even say electrical storage because that's probably more closed-minded thinking than I need to be. Like storage of solar energy in whatever method we decide to can find a way of storing it, even if it's not electric.
Yeah,
will be great. That's awesome. But again, we need to look at things like carbon capture, nuclear, hydroelectric as ways to transition to a pure solar, wind, what have you method of fusion. I don't know, while we're holding out for fusion.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we're holding out for fusion, and for all of the there's also all these the birds that are dying from all of the windmills, which is the big argument from people who previously never cared about birds.
Right.
So, well, I mean, there's many things that we need to consider.
And again, like the wind turbines do still have some of the issues around storage and those are still issues there too. So wind and solar are time dependent. Therefore, you need to be able to store that power because you can't just increase or decrease the amounts of energy you're getting, or maintain a consistent level of energy you're having as an input like you can with many of the other energy sources. I still think they're a better long-term solution, but So again, I think this is a good story. My feelings for Elon Musk and my feelings for some of the things that have been used to justify that carbon capture has been used as a justification for aside.
We're not seizing the means of production today. If Elon Musk invests in our province, I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
All right. Alcohol consumption increase in Saskatchewan leading to rise in harm.
Anyone shocked by either half of that headline?
Right. Yeah.
I don't think anyone is shocked by alcohol consumption increasing during a pandemic. And I don't think anyone is shocked by the fact that an increase in alcohol consumption is also leading to an increase in harm.
Wholesale operations of Saskatchewan Liquor and Gaming Authority increased by 7.9% in 2020 compared to the year before. Four Seasons Sports Palace attribute the increase to consumption, saying it's been seen a soar in alcohol sales. And I mean, we've talked about other forms of addiction, like you say, during the pandemic, and alcohol is a drug that people use to cope with stress, just like anything else.
What I think is important to notice in this is I think no one should be shamed for a medical issue, and addiction is a medical issue. I've probably less so in the last 6 months, but I probably drank more in the first 6 months of the pandemic than I typically did. I had other stuff going on in my life at the same time, but there's a whole bunch of reasons for it, and they talk about a bunch in the article, but even just the convenience of it, at a bar, it's $10 a drink, depending on the bar. Even a less expensive bar, you're looking at, $3, $4, $5 a drink. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Get like the days of buck a draft are probably well beyond, and maybe that still exists somewhere, but you're
the good
dealing
old
with,
days.
I think the last time I had buck a draft, it came in like slightly bigger than a shot glass, and it was watered down grossness, right? Whereas like at home, you're like, depending on the quality of alcohol you're drinking, you probably are looking at, $1 or $2 per drink, give or take. Depending. Yeah. And so like it's cheaper, it's more accessible. But even things like I'm working from home, so like I don't have to drive anywhere. And if I'm going to be working noon till 8 and I put a shot of Bailey's in my coffee, I don't like Bailey's particularly, but that's, people can put a shot of Bailey's in their coffee at 9 a.m. and it's no big deal because they're not driving anywhere. I get you're driving, so your job is somewhat different.
But like for those of us, other people can.
Not, if Uber is listening in, Corey is not drinking Bailey's before driving. Again, it shouldn't be drunk for work, but it's easy to have a drink with lunch or what have you when you're working from home. So there's convenience factor, but again, it's everyone's bored out of their mind. They're like having a couple shots of rum in your Coke with supper, or instead of a glass of water, have a gin and tonic. These are easy things to do. I was thinking about there was an experiment done, and I thought this was recent. It was one of those weird things. I just had assumed this was a social experiment or a scientific experiment done in 10, 15 years ago. But when I looked into it, it was actually done in the 70s. So I'm kind of shocked it's not more mainstream yet. But there was an experiment done by Dr. Bruce Alexander, again, in the 70s. It's come to be known as the rat park experiment. Because scientists had found if you put a rat in a cage and give it 2 water bottles, one water bottle with just plain water and the other water bottle with water laced with cocaine, the rat will drink the cocaine water until it died. Like it would overdose. If you gave it the choice, if you gave it free access to cocaine, it would overdose on the cocaine. And everyone's like, see, this is the nature of man and the nature of beasts is, we'll take the instant gratification and we need to, ensure this is why we need laws to prevent drug use.
Right.
And what Dr. Alexander did, he said, okay, let's change something else in the experiment. So instead of having a rat alone in a cage, he created these rat parks where the rats were existing in a social environment. And it's sort of like the rat amusement park. So there was the wheels and the slides and all of this other stuff. But most importantly, there were multiple rats in the cage. Yeah. So you had social interaction with the rats. And not a single rat overdosed. And in fact, most rats stuck to the regular water. A couple of them would go get a hit of the cocaine now and then.
Because loneliness kills, leads to addiction.
Right. So, and again, this is from the 70s. So we've had this research for almost 50 years now. The 70s being almost 50 years ago is a cruel reminder. You're welcome. But we've had this research now for nearly 50 years. So we know it's true. And now, to be blunt, now middle-class people are getting to experience this. Where we're having limitations on our social interactions. And so it's causing this spike of drug use. The drug of choice being alcohol because it's legal and cheap and easily accessible.
Yep. You can get it delivered to your house.
You can get it delivered to your house. And on a middle class income, it's not that expensive.
Right.
Depending on where you define middle class. But what I hope is one of the things that can come out of this pandemic is a greater level of empathy for people whose lives had that similar level of isolation before the pandemic. Because if someone is working 3 part-time jobs, 65 hours a week with only an hour or two in between each one. Because that's the thing that people don't take into account. And I know you're experiencing this very hard. 2 part-time jobs that eat up 40 hours of your week probably consume, like 2 part-time jobs that give you 40 paid hours of work.
Yeah.
Still uses up a considerably greater portion of your week than one 40-hour job does.
Yeah.
Like so someone who's working 3 part-time jobs, working 60 hours a week, barely able to make ends meet, has kids that they're looking after, they have the level of isolation that most people are experiencing right now as their normal way of living, probably even more so. Like, and that's heck, even in 2-income families that are with kids that are dealing with, like a single parent, like, that is a single parent who is working for minimum wage, trying to get by, already has the level of isolation that many of us are experiencing for the first time under COVID. It's a different type of isolation, but it's still isolation. So how the fuck can we criticize alcohol and drug use in those circumstances when we're doing the same thing when given the choice?
Yeah. It's like, I was reading something, people who are like poor, they often get financial advice from people who don't know what it's like to be poor.
Right.
Or advice on how to use their time more efficiently from people who don't know what it's like to run their lives this way. But low-income people who are working multiple jobs already are more organized than you can imagine, and are already using every penny as efficiently as they can possibly use it, with the exception of the occasional, time they buy pot or they go for a drink or whatever when they get that opportunity. Which the only time they get that opportunity is when it is strictly scheduled into their life.
And I may disagree. I still think there is value in financial education for people who don't otherwise get it. So I don't.
Yeah, I don't mean to say like that financial education is the problem. It's advice, unwarranted advice from random people.
Yes. If the financial literacy that someone is passing on is don't buy a fancy coffee, that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But there are other things that just people don't understand about the financial system we live in, that there probably are ways of people saving money or it being less expensive and all of that. But so this idea that financial education isn't at all part of the solution, I want to pull back from a little bit. But that still feeds into, like, we need to give people the time and resources to get education. And in the end, again, I don't want to say Canada's is inherently better than the US, but I think adding on health concerns on top of all of that, I can see where they have, additional issues. But if you allow people to have their healthcare needs taken care of, their subsistence needs taken care of, their educational needs taken care of, you will see a hell of a lot more people thriving and generating economic momentum than you ever will by shaming and treating people as pariahs because of addictions. Because again, it's treating a symptom, not a cause. So
yeah, that's right. Children housed in Sask government-funded group home were neglected and restrained, according to a report. Children's Advocate calls on province to make changes to group homes.
Yep.
So as far as I know, this was just one home.
Yep.
There were 4 children.
This story is just about one home.
Yeah, this one is
clear.
Yeah, I don't want to pretend that this is an isolated, single thing that never happens anywhere else. But Advocate Lisa Broda, who is an independent officer of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, issued a report on Wednesday. And basically it said that this group home, the children were malnourished. There was no sensory or therapeutic toys or tools in the home, and COVID protections were insufficient. Okay, so the thing that, I mean, without reading the whole story right this second, the thing that occurred to me right off the hop was that we currently also have a movement to stop taking children out of the hands of Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
We as a society seem to think that that's okay, and we can justify it with whatever reasoning we have. And often it's not a reasonable standard that we would hold anybody else to.
Correct.
And then to see that some children are ending up in homes like this, I think the two go hand in hand. Stop taking children away from Indigenous families and placing them in homes where they could be harmed.
Yep.
And I say that without trying to say like not all the group homes that children are placed in are like this, but some are.
And there needs to be the best interest of the children need to be the number one priority in any of these decisions. And I know some people who are very left-wing, in a lot of ways more left-wing than I am, possibly even more left-wing than you are on a lot of issues, but have a very hard time with the idea of not taking children out of homes that they feel are dangerous. Because there are situations where children in Indigenous homes, or any home, but we're talking specifically about Indigenous homes, who are in unsafe situations, and they keep coming back to, I don't want to let my fear of being called racist get in the way of protecting children. And I think you're still at that point conflating symptom with cause. Because I don't want to say none, but I would say the number of humans in existence that have intentional ill will towards their own children are an infinitesimally small number. Yeah. And that is an issue that is not going to be based on race or economics, or that is a mental health issue at that point. And even then, I guess that's not even sort of ill will. That is a mental health issue that goes beyond, I don't want to say, I hate calling people monsters. I don't want to say there isn't monsters out there, but we know there are people who are actively abusive towards children.
Yes.
That is its own separate issue. But a lot of no one wants to be neglectful of their children.
Right.
That is these are people who love their children and have circumstances that are preventing that love from manifesting in a way that the children are safe and taken care of. And rather than investing all of this money taking children away from their parents and away from their home communities in order to then put them in what could be equally unsafe circumstances, why don't we take that same resources and put them into giving people the supports they need to look after their own children? Yeah. And there was this was out of Manitoba, and I guess dropped the ball. I didn't follow up on seeing what happened with it, but there was a pilot project where in situations where children needed to be taken away from their parents, they reversed it. And so instead of taking the children out of the home, they took the parents out of the home. So the children who were needed to be taken away from their parents for their children's safety stayed in the same home, and then the equivalent of a foster parent then came into that home and allowed for the transition of the parent back in there. And there was supports in place to help the parents.
Parenting
classes, things like that.
I could see a lot of positive things about that. Like, not the least of which is that the parent is automatically assumed to be transitioning back at some point.
Yeah. So there's no easy solution on this one. Like this one is,
that's right.
Because again, we do know many of the kids who find themselves in homes like this one are taken away because of legitimate negative circumstances. The standards though, and this is where the standards by which we judge parents is certainly heavily influenced by race and economic class.
Yeah.
Race, class, and economics. Like those are a pretty significant intersection. I know I am incredibly confident in my kids not being taken from me. Because, and again, I don't think I've done things that would warrant it, but like, I think the threshold for someone who looks and sounds like me is a significantly different threshold than Indigenous Canadians or the Canadians who don't wear a suit and tie to work.
I think, and I mean, I don't know for sure if the statistics bear this out, but I think that anecdotally, there have been cases where it becomes difficult to justify removing a child from a home when it is from a wealthy or a white middle-class family, and where it seems like if that family was Indigenous or even white and poor, the justifications would not have to be made in. They don't have to make those. It doesn't take the work, right? Like they just do it. And I think that the statistics are probably going to support that if we if it was well researched.
Yeah, it would be so tough to research that. There's no ethical way of researching that.
No, not really. No. But I do know, like I say, anecdotally, I know specific families where, somebody has called like child services on them, and they come and they examine the house or whatever, and because it's a nice house that's well kept, nothing changes. Like, if you can't prove that the person is being neglectful or abusive right in that moment, then nothing happens. But if you go to the house and it's kind of a rundown house, or it's dirty, or it's not up to what you consider your standards, then suddenly the justifications start rolling into your head, and I mean that's just natural bias, I think, at that point.
I was thinking, and now thinking back, like I had two different circumstances with my oldest son where we had to call poison control because he got into something he shouldn't. Once where he drank a bunch of NyQuil, and the other I was really sick and I had a codeine cough syrup. And he got one dose of that. I had my dose sitting in a cup, and then he ended up drinking it while it was sitting there. Yeah. My upstairs is a circle, and one kid went one way, one kid went the other, and I chased the wrong kid. Yeah. But thinking back on that, I never was scared to call poison control.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that right there, that says a ton, right?
Right. So, how many other Canadians could find themselves in a similar circumstance and go, if I what would happen? Am I going to lose my kids because of this? Yeah. And like I said, I didn't have that fear. I was scared for the kid. Like, don't get me wrong. Not overly, because I knew the dosages, and I was like, and again, I called right away and was told, yeah, it's fine. One case, they said, just watch him. The other case, he did have to go to the hospital, and they had him under observation, and he was fine. But I didn't get scared of losing my kid because of it. And there have been other circumstances where they've,
because you made a mistake.
Yeah.
As a human being.
As a human being, right? Because that happens. So to the home itself, I think one of the things that's, the province says they're going to follow the recommendations of the report. So that's a positive. One of the things that gets talked about when we're dealing with any sort of child abuse scandal, whether it's within a religious institution or a sports institution or what have you, is the whole idea that there are bad people in all walks of life. That gets brought up. It's not just priests. You could find this anywhere. And my counter to that is, yes, you're right. You will find bad people anywhere. It's not just priests. And there's issues around some of the religious indoctrination, but it's the culture around it. It's what are you doing to stop the people who will do that? And again, with this home, what was being done to ensure that this home didn't end up like this in the first place? And what are we going to do going forward? Like these recommendations, again, following the report, a publication of the report, the province issues a statement and it will accept all recommendations. I hope they are held accountable to actually doing so rather than just saying they will and then not putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. There's something in the system clearly failed if it got this bad in the first place.
Yeah. So.
Whether it's, I don't know if there's like something, and I don't necessarily want to say that, like, I don't know these people. I don't know the people that ran this group home. Mm-hmm. They clearly didn't do what they were supposed to do. I try to be an empathetic person. I try to understand why they are the way they are. Something happened that I don't know.
Yeah. We also don't know how long it had been going on for. So how, it's also, I think, important that this didn't get caught because of a routine inspection or the province doing follow up or anything like that. Like that, I think I would feel a lot better if this was it took way too long to catch, but at least it got caught. This got caught when a 7-year-old kid ran away.
With no clothes.
Yeah. Like this got caught because it had to, like like this wasn't there was an inspection and something came up. This was a 7-year-old boy ran away, I believe was picked up by the police. Then then that was traced back to the home.
A 7-year-old boy with complex care needs.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Found lost, naked, confused in the parking lot. Again, it's when they that led to the investigation, which then discovered they had been struggling with staffing levels. There had been internal discord. There were other critical issues. How
did it get this way? That's the question, right? How?
So, they're not, obviously the province is not going to be, giving out specific details about the home or who or names because there's children involved, right? So that's, that said, the one thing that, I guess the other thing that is concerning, is the fact that the home was, the group home was not named in the report, but the article talks about how CBC previously reported the home was operated. Oh, so they are saying which home it was. They don't name the home in the report, but they do know which home it was, and it was operated by a for-profit company named CBI Health Group. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's... as capitalist I am, I don't really think this is really where we should be profiting. I don't think that's a recipe for success.
We're seeing a lot of for-profit homes having issues with staffing in the long-term care facilities during COVID.
Yep.
And that's been a huge issue all across Canada, is these for-profit long-term care homes. And I'm wondering if maybe there are certain things that just shouldn't be considered viable as a for-profit business.
Yeah.
Although, I'm just a dirty commie, so.
And I'm not. So, again, this is, if it's important enough to be run by the government, it should be run by the government. And for long-term care homes, I don't necessarily think it all have to be run by the government. I think, if someone has the money and wants to pay for pay for luxury in their waning years, great. But
I mean, sure. Yeah, I guess. But for your average person who, this is just how they have to live. Yeah.
So I don't know. This story is awful, and there's so much about it that is awful. But again, I think the takeaway is, at this point, we do need to have oversight and more careful oversight of what happens going forward. And again, I don't think this is a political, I think this is a bureaucratic issue. I think this is something that transcends political party.
I feel like everybody should be on board with fixing whatever caused this.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I'd really like it if conservatives would stop lying about budgets.
Yeah. If we could start being honest about how important a deficit is versus.
Yeah. Well, years ago, I sort of posted so the left will often say things like, hey, in times of economic downturn, sometimes it makes sense to temporarily, this is not even the left, this I would consider a centrist view, temporarily run a deficit in order to stimulate economic growth with the intentions of once we are back on an economic upswing, we will shift back into building up that surplus so that we have a rainy day fund when the next economic downturn hits. And use of these levers can help slow down the growth of the economy in order to sustain that growth over a longer period of time. Whereas on the flip side, running that deficit for a short period of time or for a long period of time when the economic downturn is happening allows a softer landing to the trough. And the right will just say, no, deficits are always bad. Yeah. Or come out and say, we're not running a deficit. No, but you're spending more than you're taking in. We're not running a deficit. Because that was the Sask Party line for years. They just would run a deficit and not call it a deficit.
Yeah.
Because if you or I found ourselves in a spot where the amount we spent every year was greater than our income, but we were dipping into our savings, we would not be able to call that a balanced budget.
No, that's right.
Right? Like that. And there are times you need to do that. That's why you have savings.
Right.
And especially hey, I've been saving up to buy a house, and the year in which I buy a house, I ran a fairly substantial deficit because I withdrew.
For sure.
And arguably, and when you're transferring assets from one asset class to another, from cash assets to property, there's something to show for it, and you can make an argument there. But when it's simply dipping into a rainy day fund in order to not have to admit that you're running a deficit, do it. That's why those rainy day funds are there. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that during a boom.
Right. Yeah.
But now this nonsense of 6 months ago, during the election, criticizing the NDP for predicting exactly what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Literally mocking the NDP for saying exactly what you're that's where the hypocrisy comes in for me.
Yeah.
And it just happens so frequently. Again, it's not like the left never does this either, but it just doesn't seem to happen to the same extreme where it's just this constant, that could never happen. And then when it happens, going, no one could have predicted this. Like listening to Harpower, it's as if there was some big surprising thing that no one could have ever predicted would happen.
Right. Except it was predicted.
Yeah. Except like this is literally what everyone was saying
Yeah.
6 months ago and you were making fun of them for saying it.
Yeah.
Like that to me is where the frustration comes in on this. And like, I don't know, like I said, it seems like we go through this all the time where a lot of the solutions the NDP and the Conservatives or the Sask party brought to the table during the election were not that different from each other. The budget predictions weren't that different. Right. And what we're now seeing, as far as when the Sask party is probably going to return to surplus, if they ever return to surplus, because I'm also not naive enough to think that in, bump the estimated date for surplus by 2 years, and then in 2 years from now, not bump it another 2 years. Like I'm not naive enough to think that we will ever get past this. Like where they're saying now is essentially exactly where the NDP were saying. Yeah. So I just, the idea that, and again, everyone made fun of Trudeau, the budget will balance itself comment, which was taken out of context, but of course that is what it is. And I'm not a Trudeau fan by any stretch, but like the idea that you can cut the deficit, not cut spending, not increase taxes, like one of those three is going to have to give unless you are growing your economy at a faster rate than you are growing the demand for government services. Because it's not just growing your economy. If you're growing your economy, but there's a demand for government services that are growing at the same time. So again, most commonly a growth in population will cause that, but other things can cause it as well. Unless you're doing that, you have to do one of those other three levers. And just this idea that like we would do it by magic is ridiculous. Because the Trudeau quote that was taken out of context talked about, here are the things you can do to stimulate economic growth. And if you stimulate economic growth in these ways, the budget will then balance because you're not increasing your tax rate, but you're increasing your tax revenue by increasing the economic growth and therefore increasing the total of what you're taxing. You're increasing the denominator essentially.
Right. Yeah.
So, which again, that sound like, but you can't say that during a pandemic and a time of like economic stagnation. And again, what was being predicted? Like, it wasn't as if we weren't in the middle of the pandemic during the election. This would be different if the election was a year ago. I would probably be cutting Mo a heck of a lot more slack if the election was a year ago from now. We were leading and we were coming up on the 1 year anniversary of the first lockdown. So if the election had been February of 2020 as opposed to the fall of 2020, sure, you know what? Few people could have predicted it would be as serious as it is back in February.
Right.
But we're going to come out of it. And even then, to now be saying, oh, oops. I'm also again, this is part of that thing too. I'm also not even as angry at the Sask party as everyone who believes them. At this point, when do you realize you're Charlie Brown kicking the football and the Sask party is Lucy holding it there?
Yeah. That's
right? Like,
she's done this over and over and over again.
This isn't new. And we said that on our early shows, right? When we were doing election analysis, we said this exact same thing. These promises and predictions that the Sask party is making are going to be the football that's yanked out. So
they can't follow through on 90% of what they say.
Yeah.
Because, for a variety of reasons, but I think it's because their ideology is inconsistent and incoherent.
It's probably part of it.
Because like the very idea that you will always be able to say that deficits are bad, even when you're in the middle of a pandemic, it's just on its face a denial of reality, right?
Yeah. Or like, because then you have to admit you're a shitty government then, because they took over when there was a surplus.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, you know what? Like, it's both.
The rainy days fund didn't come out of nowhere, right?
Right. Like, the Sask party took over when the province had a record surplus and a record rainy day fund.
Yeah.
Like, so, like,
and
if you're going to stick to deficits are always bad, then you have to acknowledge Wall was the one who fucked the pooch. Or you just come out and say, hey, sometimes, deficits are necessary.
Right.
And
just be honest.
Just be honest about it and acknowledge, like, you got to do one of the two. And I can already hear the people going, oh, you lefties, you all want nonstop deficits, or, oh, you lefties, you're going to attack Wall no matter what. Like, we can have a honest, fair discussion about either one of those points. Right. I can disagree with someone on either one of those. And heck, I can probably, in a lot of circumstances, see the other side's point of view on either one of those.
Right.
But I can't have a good faith conversation with someone who is arguing both of those points, because in doing so, they're doing it in bad faith. That's. Anyways. Yeah, I guess I can find 10 minutes worth of things to talk about with that story.
Yeah. I think maybe at some point during our podcasting, it might be worth discussing the fact that the NDP, when they had the rainy day fund, they were essentially a fiscally conservative government that was cutting a variety of things in various places. Like, they were doing austerity in a lot of ways to get that surplus. Yep. And then at the time, the Sask party and the conservatives in the province were pissed off because hospitals were closing. They were pissed off because this was happening, and the buses were no good, and whatever else they were complaining about. And then they're the other side now. Yeah. They always want to say, like, the left is the one that wants to run deficits all the time, but then the left was the one doing austerity and doing the conservative thing.
And that's true both, like, on the national level and the provincial level.
Yeah.
Like, you and I are not spring chickens. Like, I remember the Jean Chrétien cuts and the Paul Martin cuts. Yep. And, like, there was a lot they did that was significantly more conservative, for lack of a better term, fiscally conservative, for lack of a better term, than I certainly thought was prudent. I was a lot more fiscally conservative at the time than I am now, so it was probably more in line with my beliefs then than it is with my beliefs now.
Yeah, same here.
And it's times change and people change, and that is what it is. But that seems to be a pretty common thread in Canada, where the right talks the big talk about being fiscally responsible.
But when it comes down to it,
they spend I guess it's not even as if they're doing lower taxes, because at least then there would be consistency, but they spend more than the left does too.
Yeah.
Like they spend it on different things.
Yeah. Like big projects, right? Like they don't, instead of helping low income earners, right. They don't want to give out handouts, but they'll fund a new ring road or, or whatever.
Yeah. So, and some of that, again, you can have debates on where,
of course,
infrastructure should be invested and all of those things. But again, it's not like what we call the right wing in Canada, the Conservative Party, the Sask Party, the UCP, what have you. It's not like they spend less. They just tend to spend less on healthcare and education.
Yeah.
And spend it in other places. Because again, if it was lower taxes, and chop taxes, chop spending, altogether, like then you're at least giving people a fair assessment of what to vote for, or what to vote against.
Right.
I would still, vote against that.
Yeah, that's right.
But at least is that consistency there, and people get to actually pick and choose what they want. So
yeah.
I guess that's the problem with when what you're offering isn't actually what people want.
Yeah.
Then it comes down to you either have to change what you're offering or lie. So
yeah. You can find us at anchor.fm/FromManyPeoples. Our Twitter handle is at skpoliticspod. Facebook.com/FromManyPeoplesStrengthPod is our Facebook page. And you can email us at FromManyPeoples@gmail.com. Or if you want to buy us a coffee, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/FromManyPeoples.
Well, it was great getting a chance to chat with you again, Corey. As always, I appreciate all the hard work you do into making sure we're able to chat together and let other people listen in on our thoughts. So I look forward to talking to you again next week.
You bet. Have a good one.
Take care.